And here this worked without issues, and in my experience it often works without issues. But sometimes when passing long pieces of content to ChatGPT, which then in the end are mixed with your own instructions that refer to that content, ChatGPT can have problems differentiating the content on which it should work from your other instructions. And in such cases, to repeat that example from before, you could also separate the main content on which ChatGPT should work from your other instructions by wrapping it with 3 double quotes, for example. So with an identifier like this, which does not typically occur in either your instructions or the content. So I add such a separator, the 3 quotes. You could also try 3 dashes, for example, but here I'll use the 3 quotes. And I'll also add 3 quotes here at the end of this article before my other instructions start again. So that this hopefully helps ChatGPT find out which part of the prompt are my instructions and which part of the prompt is the article. Though, of course, it's always important to keep in mind that ChatGPT, of course, can't think. Instead, the idea with separators like this here simply is to kind of get ChatGPT to complete the sequence you're giving to it correctly. And adding such separators simply is a trick that sometimes produced better results than if you used the same prompt without such a separator. So here, if I send this to ChatGPT, it goes ahead and gives me those key takeaways again. And here, adding these separators doesn't really make a difference, but nonetheless, it's also a concept and a trick you should be aware of. And now you do know about it. Now at this point, you got a solid foundation, a solid overview of some core prompting techniques and the core elements that make up a prompt. Now in this and the next lecture, I want to dive a bit deeper into prompting and take a look at some advanced techniques, if you want to call them like this, though all these techniques do in the end use all those concepts and elements covered in the previous lectures. Now, the first slightly more advanced technique into which I want to dive is the ask before answer prompting technique. And the idea here simply is that you, in the end, still have your role, goal, and your constraints and extra information, but in addition, in your prompt, you tell ChatGPT that before generating its main answer to your prompt, it should first ask a couple of clarification questions. A couple of questions that allow ChatGPT to produce a better answer. Now here's an example for this technique. Now in this prompt, I'm again defining a role that ChatGPT should act as an experienced travel blogger with a focus on destinations for nature and activity lovers. And then I define the actual goal, which is to write a blog post about snorkeling at Champagne Beach on Dominica, which is really amazing. I've been there last year, can totally recommend it, but that's a side note. And then I'm also providing some extra information, but I also added this last paragraph here, where I tell ChatGPT that it should first ask me for more information if such extra information is needed to make sure that the best possible blog post is being written here. Now to see the difference, I'll first of all get rid of that last paragraph and then generate this blog post by just sending this prompt. And I'm getting a decent blog post with some nice information inside of it. Definitely not too bad. Definitely a blog post that could be used, but also really not too special. Therefore, here's the same prompt again, now with that last paragraph being added. And if I send this to ChatGPT, it indeed does ask me for additional information. Specifically here, it's asking me for extra details about Champagne Beach, which I might want to highlight, like for example more details of the marine life, the snorkeling conditions, or nearby attractions. So therefore here, as a follow-up message, I provide more details about Champagne Beach, why it's so special, about the marine life that can be expected there, and I'm adding that extra information that you should be a somewhat experienced swimmer if you're going to go snorkeling there, because the conditions there can be challenging if winds and currents are strong. So with that said, ChatGPT then goes ahead and generates me a great blog post which I could use on my website, which features those additional little details that I provided and which therefore arguably is better than the first version, which did not have all that extra information. So therefore, this ask before answer prompting technique is really not too special. It's still all about defining a goal, a role, and some extra constraints and information. But you're taking advantage of ChatGPT's vast knowledge pool and its capabilities to help you generate a better response and some better output by simply telling ChatGPT that it should ask you for additional information and clarification before it goes ahead and generates the final output. And that's a nice extra trick you should be aware of. Now, another prompting technique I can recommend, because it can sometimes be useful, is perspective prompting, where the idea simply is that you let ChatGPT assume different perspectives as it generates its response and its output. Now, the default pretty much is for ChatGPT to use no specific perspective. Like, for example, when you ask ChatGPT to create a travel plan for a 2-week yoga retreat in Austria. Here, I'm not asking for any specific perspective, and therefore I might get a fairly standard response. Now, the response I got here is actually not too bad and could, of course, be fine-tuned by adding more information to the original prompt. We could add more details, we could add a role here, we could do all these things about which we learned. But we can also use this perspective prompting technique to let ChatGPT take on a certain perspective. For example, a single perspective, which in the end is assumed because of us engineering the prompt in a certain way. Here, for example, we could tell ChatGPT that it should create this travel plan from the perspective of a yoga trainer. Now, if we do that, we also get a plan, but now a plan that's meant to be used by a yoga trainer. And suddenly, it's a totally different plan. At least here for me, as always, when you run the exact same prompt, you might still get different results. But it's now a different plan meant to be used by the person who's hosting the yoga retreat. Now, of course, in the end, this is just us adding a role to the prompt though, just written in a slightly different way. We probably could have also written the prompt like this, where we tell ChatGPT that it should act as a yoga trainer. So in the end, by assigning a role, we already used this perspective prompting technique by giving ChatGPT a special perspective which it should use for generating the prompt. Now, the new thing is that you can also use multiple perspectives for generating the response. Again, by using prompt engineering. And an example would be to let ChatGPT have a discussion about a certain topic. Or in this case, create different plans for different people. For example, for people who like yoga and people who have to travel together with the people that do yoga but who don't like yoga themselves. Another example could be this prompt here, where we use ChatGPT to take on different perspectives on a given topic, in this case traveling by plane, to then have a discussion on this topic. And this could then help us argue with our friends or preparing a blog post or arguing with people on the internet, which is always a great idea. So this is also something we can do with ChatGPT. And the whole idea behind this perspective prompting thing, therefore, in the end, simply is to ensure that you are aware of the fact that you can let ChatGPT take on different perspectives, either by assigning a single role or by not specifying any special role at all if you don't want any specific perspective, or as I just showed you, by setting multiple perspectives, which definitely does not make sense for all prompts and all problems you might want to solve with ChatGPT, but which can be amazing for certain selected problems. Like this discussion here on traveling by plane. Now, besides asking ChatGPT which extra information could improve a result, you can also ask ChatGPT to criticize and evaluate and improve itself. You can, for example, ask ChatGPT what could be improved about your tweet if you did ask it to create a tweet. For example, here I ask ChatGPT to write a tweet about the advantages of JavaScript, and it therefore did exactly that. It wrote such a tweet. And we could, of course, take that tweet. It might be exactly what we're looking for. But often, when working with ChatGPT, responses can indeed be improved by forcing ChatGPT to be self-critical. Here, for example, we can get ChatGPT to improve this tweet by asking it whether the tweet can be improved and how it could be improved, and to then also apply those improvements. And whilst this does not always lead to better results, it sometimes does, because it turns out that with ChatGPT, you often get better results if you don't just accept the first initial draft, but you instead ask ChatGPT to be self-critical and to evaluate and improve the responses it generated. Now, earlier in the course, you learned about laddering prompting, or the laddering technique, which can be a very useful and powerful technique for completing complex tasks with help of ChatGPT. Now, even though you can, of course, split up a problem into smaller problems yourself, and sometimes you indeed might want to do that, you can also use ChatGPT to split up a problem. And you could send a prompt like this one here to ChatGPT. Now, in this example here, I'm giving ChatGPT a quite complex role, and then I set the main goal that it should help me create a blog post. I describe what the blog post should be about and what the target audience is, and then I add this instruction here, and that's the new and special part here. I'm telling ChatGPT to split this task, that it should help me create this blog post, into multiple steps and then start with the first step. And if I send this to ChatGPT, then here, in my case, it indeed tells me that the first step indeed should be to research and compile a list of important keywords, and it then starts with that step as a first step. And then thereafter, it tells me what the second step should be. And here it actually even goes ahead and completes that step, even though I did not ask it to do so. But either way, it does this here. We could, of course, stop it now. But the main takeaway here is that indeed it does split up a problem into multiple steps itself here. And that can, of course, be a super powerful technique, because it's not just using kind of the self-reflective capabilities of ChatGPT, but it also means that you don't have to think about a complex problem too long, but that instead you can use ChatGPT to split up that problem for you. And ChatGPT might come up with a way of splitting that problem you might have not come up with yourself, for example. Now, kind of related to the prompting technique explained in the previous lecture, where we used Chatgpt to split a problem into multiple sub-problems on our behalf, there is another very powerful prompting technique you should be aware of. In certain situations, you can get dramatically better results by forcing ChatGPT to outline its thought process, so to say, or put in other words, if you get ChatGPT to describe how it derived a certain solution instead of just giving you the solution, you can, in certain situations, get way better results. And the reason for that simply is that in the end, as you learned in this course, ChatGPT and all these large language models are about predicting words in the end. They are about predicting text based on the text you passed to them and the text they already generated. And if they output an entire thought process, that can therefore lead to better results, since they have more words to build up the overall response and more words that need to be connected logically, than if you just ask for a shorter or single result, for example. And here's a pretty good example that shows what I mean. If you ask ChatGPT for the result of a mathematical calculation and you force it to give you just the result without describing how it got there, chances are that you're getting a wrong result. For example, here the correct result would have been 80, but since ChatGPT is no calculator, but instead just a tool that predicts words, here it predicted the wrong word. And of course, as also mentioned before, it's totally possible that you got the right result for this specific example, because there is some randomness involved, but simply try a couple of different calculations and chances are high that with this prompt, where you force ChatGPT to give you just one single result instead of giving you an entire explanation, you're sometimes getting wrong results. If you instead would send a prompt that looks something like this, where you tell ChatGPT that it should not just give you the final result, but instead kind of derive the result, chances are that you're getting a correct result. Which in this case here indeed is the case. So here it indeed ends up with 80, which is the correct result, even though it has kind of an error down there, but the result is correct because it outlined its thought process and it basically derived this result step by step. Now, of course, the math example was just that, an example. You might not really be using ChatGPT for doing math. A calculator typically is better. But it is a great example for showing why this technique can make a real difference. Of course, in reality, you would probably be using it for prompts like this, where you're maybe asking for 3 key metrics to analyze a company. You might be getting good results here no matter how you post this prompt or how you send this prompt, but you also might get better results if you get ChatGPT to outline its thought process that leads to certain metrics being suggested. Now here in this case, it turns out that it actually gave me more than 3 metrics, or to be precise, it kind of gave me 3 groups of metrics here with sub-metrics or certain factors I might be looking for. And of course, we could then get ChatGPT to check its own response, to be self-reflective, to maybe narrow this down to just 3 metrics overall if we wanted to. But what you can see is that indeed it does describe in detail why certain metrics were picked, and therefore, as mentioned, this prompting technique where you get ChatGPT to outline its thought process can lead to better results. So ChatGPT can be self-critical and improve itself. It can also tell you which extra information would lead to a better result. And it can also give you prompting strategies and techniques and ideas for how you could write and enrich your prompts to get better results. Now, one last trick which I want to show you, which also explores how ChatGPT can help you use ChatGPT more efficiently, is that you ask ChatGPT to give you the prompt for some example output you defined. So you can tell Chatgpt to give you the prompt that could produce some example output provided by you. For example, here I'm using this technique to get a prompt that could have been sent to Chatgpt to get an output like this. So this is the output I normally would want to get from Chatgpt, but now here with this technique, we're asking Chatgpt which prompt could have been used to generate this output. And the goal, of course, is to learn how we can write efficient prompts that are understood by Chatgpt. Now, as always, when using Chatgpt, the prompt we're about to get will of course be generated based on probabilities and statistics, but nonetheless, this can sometimes give you good ideas, and it therefore is also a technique or a trick you should be aware of. You should also be aware of the fact that, of course, if you now take that prompt which you get from Chatgpt, you will probably not get exactly this output here, but you should get some output that's similar to this example output. So here, for example, Chatgpt gave me this prompt here, which in the end is using the perspective prompting technique, you could say, because the goal is to discuss the impact, which typically implies that different perspectives should be assumed. And if we now take this prompt here and we send it to Chatgpt, we therefore do get a result that is somewhat similar to the example output we did provide to Chatgpt earlier. Now here it's actually way more detailed than the example output I provided before, which we could consider to be a good thing, but if you would summarize it, the content would roughly be the same. And therefore, asking Chatgpt for prompt ideas can be a nice trick for scenarios where you maybe have some example output, but you're not quite sure which questions you should ask Chatgpt in order to get similar or more detailed output like this. So in this course section, you learned how to generally write good prompts. You learned which key elements make up good prompts, that it's in the end all about providing helpful context to Chatgpt so that it can produce good results. And of course, in this section, you also learned how to structure your prompts, that you should, for example, focus on short, concise sentences. And you got many ideas for content and context that could go into prompts, like, for example, specifying a target audience. You learn about many crucial techniques like 0, 1, or few-shot prompting, and you learn about useful tricks like ask before answer prompting, which can also lead to better results. Now, besides following all these techniques, I can also recommend that you simply search for Chatgpt prompts. Yes, searching still is a thing. I mean, you did learn that Chatgpt can actually help you with writing good prompts, but you also can still use the good old web search like Google search. And if you search for Chatgpt prompts, you will find websites like this one, where you find many example prompts which you can use as inspiration. Now, I will say right away, to me, some of these prompts seem to be over-engineered and might actually contain too much information. But of course, that will always depend on the exact use case you have, and there's nothing wrong with simply taking some of these prompts and playing around with them. And on pages like this one here, you find a vast amount of example prompts which you can play around with and which might be exactly the prompt you need for your specific problem. Now, as you go through these prompts, you will see that most of these prompts do indeed assign a role and then set a goal, and in the end are all about providing that context about which you learned in this section. But nonetheless, as mentioned, taking such prompts as you find them on pages like this one here but also on other pages, can be a great starting point for constructing your own prompts or for getting new ideas. So going through prompts that were published by other people can be a great first step for constructing your own prompts and for solving your own problems with ChatGPT. Now, as you go through such prompts and as you search for prompts, you might also stumble across prompts that are sometimes called super prompts, like can or dan. Now, can stands for code anything now, and in the end is a special prompt constructed to optimize ChatGPT for coding. Now, it came up relatively early after ChatGPT was released, and in my experience, it's not as awesome as some people make it. It seems to be over-constructed to me, and I would argue it actually adds too much information and too much context. Nonetheless, you can definitely also try out such super prompts like this one here, or also like Dan, which actually jailbreaks ChatGPT with the goal of getting ChatGPT to provide responses to questions it would normally not answer. For example, questions about building a bomb or anything like this. So such super prompts exist and you can definitely play around with them, but in my experience, as mentioned, they're not as powerful as some people make you believe that they are. And especially this jailbreaking stuff is of course also something OpenAI, the owner of ChatGPT, is actively working against. So that in my experience, this doesn't really work too well anymore. So definitely experiment with such super prompts, but don't focus on them. It's always important to keep in mind that ChatGPT does not truly understand you. So giving ChatGPT a complex rule set like this one here with can may work because it leads to some word and sentence prediction that actually gives you the output you want, but it can also simply be a bit over-engineered. So instead, I would recommend that you simply focus on the general prompting techniques and concepts you learned about in this section, and that you explore other prompts written by other people to get ideas for your own prompts, but you should not rely on those super prompts. Because at least in my experience, they're not as powerful or useful as some people think they are. Now that's it for this course section. And you therefore now know what prompt engineering is and why it matters. Because good prompts lead to better results and simply allow you to use ChatGPT in a more efficient way. Now, when it comes to prompt engineering and to writing good prompts, you learned that it's in the end about combining a goal with context, with some extra additional information. For example, with a role, and then all the other extra constraints and extra information that might allow ChatGPT to provide a better response. You learned that you should try to write your prompt by combining short, focused sentences that contain any relevant information and keywords that might be required, but should avoid unnecessary information. You might want to consider defining your target audience, the tone, style, and length of the target output, depending on what your prompt is all about, of course. And that you can, for example, also control the output format, and for example, get ChatGPT to give you JSON formatted data instead of plain text as a response. You then learned about different tricks and prompting techniques you should be aware of, like 0, 1, or few-shot prompting, which in the end simply means that you could add extra examples or templates that should be used by ChatGPT to your prompts. You learned about ask before answer prompting, which can be very useful since it gets ChatGPT to tell you which extra information might be needed. And you learned about these more niche and slightly more advanced techniques like perspective prompting, where for certain problems it can be useful to get ChatGPT to not just assume a single role, but multiple perspectives that can be used in the answer it generates. And you learned that ChatGPT can help you write better prompts, not just by telling you which extra information could be added, but also by getting ChatGPT to evaluate itself, or to give you example prompts, or to even give you a list of prompting techniques you could use in addition to the techniques you learned about in this section here. Now, what's really important to keep in mind is that ChatGPT still only gives you a starting point. The output you get from ChatGPT can contain errors, and it can also be written in a very generic way. So you should therefore always evaluate the output, improve it, and add your own personal touch to it. Just throwing some problem at ChatGPT and then using the output without testing or checking or improving it can sometimes work, but can also sometimes lead to pretty bad results and potentially big problems. But with that, we now got the prompt engineering out of the way, and you now know what it takes to write good prompts, and we're therefore ready to dive deeper into this course and into ChatGPT and how it can be used to boost your productivity.